Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating text that attempts to bridge a gap that's literally been around for over a century. It's called the Psychoanalysis of Affective Formation. Now, historically, traditional psychoanalysis and spiritual formation have basically been treated as completely separate worlds. Sometimes they're even seen as outright competitors, right? But the author of our source text makes a pretty bold claim. They argue that splitting the mind and the soul like that is just a fundamental mistake. So we're going to take an impartial look at this unique approach to healing the whole person. Let's get right into it.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll start by looking at the false enemy, and then we'll ground that in a very relatable dilemma of resentment. After that, we'll map out the anatomy of transformation, which is anchored by the prayer of St. Augustine. Finally, we'll break down the actual methodology of affective formation before wrapping up by looking beyond the prison.
All right, Section 1, the false enmity. So let's look at this theoretical divide the author is trying to completely dismantle. For the longest time, there's been this sort of unspoken rule. One discipline handles the head, and the other handles the soul. Religion's job is to show us our ultimate end, right? To point us upward and care for the soul. Psychoanalysis, on the other hand, traditionally investigates the internal obstacles and cares for the mind. Now, the goal of this text isn't to magically turn your analyst into a priest or to turn religion into psychotherapy. They absolutely still have different functions. But integrating them means using one to point the way and the other to clear out the roadblocks.
Moving on to Section 2, the dilemma of resentment.
To really grasp how this works, we need to step away from the high-level theory for a second. The text gives us this incredibly relatable hypothetical example. Picture a Christian man who is carrying a deep, profound resentment against his father. Now, he knows he should forgive him. He goes to church, he prays, he might even be that guy giving other people great advice about how important forgiveness is. And yet, internally, he's completely paralyzed. He literally cannot let it go.
Which brings us to the absolute core question here. What is actually happening inside this man? The author points out that just telling him, hey, you need to forgive, is completely useless. He already knows that. But interestingly, traditional psychoanalysis falls a bit short here too. You could spend years explaining to him, well, you feel this way because your father did X, Y, and Z to you. And that might be 100% true, but it's just not enough. Because the lingering question is always, okay, and now what? What do we actually do with all this resentment? This is exactly where the author's framework suggests the two fields have to unite.
In this new framework, the analyst's job is to investigate the invisible forces that are actively blocking this man from doing the good he wants to do. And the source suggests some pretty fascinating, heavily hidden obstacles. I mean, what if the man's resentment has actually mutated into his core identity? Let's be real for a second. There can be a twisted kind of pleasure in feeling wronged. Maybe being the victim gives him the secret sense of moral superiority over his dad. Or maybe letting go of that anger means he has to completely destroy a self-image he's been fiercely protecting for 20 years. It's not that he lacks intellectual knowledge, it's that he has a deformed affection, and that affection is actively going to war against the very good he claims to desire.
So, Section 3, the anatomy of transformation.
If just knowing the right thing to do isn't enough to change you, how does real internal change actually happen? Well, the author lays out this very specific 6-stage process. First, your conscience illuminates the conflict. Second, your intelligence comprehends reality. You realize, oh wow, I am the one keeping this wound open. Third, and this is the absolute linchpin of the whole thing, love orders the intelligence toward the good. Fourth, right reason finally emerges from that union. Fifth, this right reason moves your will. And finally, stage 6, your action actually changes. You cannot just skip to step 6. Step 3 is the engine. But as the text notes, that love in step 3, it doesn't just magically appear out of thin air.
Let's look at Section 4, the prayer of St. Augustine.
To explain where this required love actually comes from, the author anchors the whole framework in a pretty profound piece of theology. Give what you command and command what you will. That's a famous quote from St. Augustine. And the text uses it because it perfectly illustrates the human drama. When we're commanded to love, the most honest human response is basically, look, I want to, but I literally can't do it perfectly on my own. You have to give me the grace necessary so I can actually do what you're asking me to do. It is a total admission of our limits and the absolute necessity of divine grace.
And this perfectly clarifies the boundaries of the whole framework. The psychoanalyst is not producing grace. They can't artificially inject love into a patient's heart, and they definitely do not replace a priest or a spiritual director. So what is their role? They clear the road. Their entire job is to uncover and remove those affective obstacles we talked about, the pride,
the victimhood, those deformed attachments. Because those are the exact things actively preventing the person from cooperating with the grace they're already being given.
All right, Section 5, Affective Formation. To actually go in and remove those obstacles, the author proposes a massive shift in the kind of questions we ask. Traditional psychoanalysis usually stops at what happened to you in the past. It's looking for the external cause of the pain. But affective formation demands a second, way harder question. What did you do internally with what happened? Think about that shift. It moves the focus away from what was done to you and asks how you absorbed, or weaponized, or deformed that experience inside your own affections. It basically turns the patient from a passive victim into a highly active participant. Because of that shift, the questions the analyst has to ask become incredibly challenging. They have to ask, what is this person actually loving right now? Do you love forgiveness more, or do you secretly love the pleasure of your revenge? Do you love the truth more, or that super comfortable self-image you've built up? What suffering have you allowed to mutate into your actual identity? What deformed affection is stopping your intelligence from accepting the truth? The goal isn't just to explain the human being anymore. It's to understand exactly how their loves got deformed and how to reorder them. Finally, Section 6, Beyond the Present.
So, what is the ultimate endgame of all this? The author offers a really sharp critique of modern psychology here. They argue that if a science brilliantly explains exactly why someone is suffering, but completely forgets to ask where that person is supposed to be walking toward, it fails. A science that maps out our wounds perfectly but ignores our ultimate purpose turns analysis into nothing more than a highly detailed description of a prison cell. Sure, you might know every single brick in the wall of your trauma, but at the end of the day, you're still locked inside. The author's proposal is fundamentally different. Yes, of course, we have to understand the prison. Yes, we have to point out all those invisible chains. But the final purpose of all this psychological digging isn't just self-knowledge. The ultimate goal is to help the person become free enough to actually walk toward the good. It is entirely about untangling those deformed affections so that your capacity to truly love can finally actually grow. Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought from the source material. When we look at our own self-analysis, our own attempts to dig into our past and our traumas, we really have to ask ourselves, are we just getting really, really good at describing the architecture of our own prison? Or are we actually doing the hard work of reordering our affections, cooperating with grace, and learning how to love? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. It's a deep, beautiful topic, and I really hope it leaves you with a lot to chew on. See you next time.